When we look specifically at production theory, notice the full stop. This is true for all firms. In the second part of the theory of the firm unit, we'll talk about the different types of firms, and they'll have differences, but the differences are never about costs. Costs are the same for everybody if we assume the law of eventually diminishing marginal returns, which is the previous video. Let's start with a schedule. So in this schedule, we've got the number of workers. They're going to be my variable input. You don't see the fixed input on here, and it doesn't matter. Remember, it's the short run, so we assume that there's some fixed input. Again, typically it's going to be space, the size of a workshop or building or office, but it could be anything. So what we're going to do is we're going to add workers. So I'm going to hire one, then a second, then a third, fourth, and fifth worker. So important to note that down here we have a total of 5 workers, not 5 plus 4, etc. So what we're going to look at is as we add each worker, what happens to production. We're going to see this in numbers, and then of course we're going to put it over onto a graph. So with the first worker, I hire the first worker, and my total production goes to 1. So I make one product, one thingamajig, or whatever it might be. Remember we said on a few videos back that we need to have some formula for this. So we're going to take the total production, and we're going to take the workers, which are on the x-axis, and divide it by the total product. So it's 1 divided by 1, and that's our average production. So what we're saying is that all the workers, for each one worker, I'm getting 1 product. So that's the average. Simple, because there's only 1 and 1 and 1. The marginal product, that is the change. So before I had any workers, when I had 0 workers, my total product was obviously nothing. I don't count myself in this case. So I hire the first worker, now I can produce, the change then is the marginal product of 1. Let's see what happens to total production as I increase workers. As I increase workers, as I go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, we see that at first total production goes up from 1 to 4, and again that's for specialization and reasons that we mentioned on the previous video. Then it goes up a little bit more to 6, stays at 6, and then falls to 5 because now we've gotten into, we've hit the point of diminishing marginal returns, the point at which the diminishing marginal returns kicks in. Okay, so that's our total production. Well then, let's make some quick predictions about what's going to happen with marginal production. Again, we can see marginal production here, but we often like to write it separately. When I went from 1 to 4, my marginal production had to have been 3. That's the change. And then from 4 to 6, it's 2. From 6 to 6, well, it's nothing. And then 6 to 5, it's -1. So this is one of the few cases in economics where having a negative or positive sign will matter. So keep that straight. So again, we see that here, down to -1 in this box. The average production then is simply taking the amount of product and dividing it by the workers. So we're taking 4 and dividing it by 2, and obviously the average production, each worker on average is producing 2. 6 divided by 3, each worker on average is producing, well, again, 2. And that's going to continue to be true all the way down. So again, we see it go up at first, stay the same. Sometimes you see this number stay the same, sometimes it changes. It doesn't really matter, because eventually what we see is that it begins to fall. Okay, so let's graph this out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start by graphing just total production first. So what we're going to do here, the way we've got our graph set up, is we have our inputs, in this case workers, they're on the x-axis, and we have our output on the y-axis. So we're going to go, okay, when I have 1 worker, what's my total product? So 1 worker, 1 is my total product, my total output, and that goes right there. When I hire the second worker, my total product goes up to 4. And that's what a total product curve looks like. We see that it gets steeper, and then shallower, and then negative. So we see the slope increasing at It's increasing at an increasing rate, increasing at a lower rate, and then decreasing is what's always going to happen with the total production curve. For marginal production, well, remember, it's all going to start at the same point, so we'll do the same thing. So marginal production of the first worker, the greater amount they produce is a greater amount of 1. So that's going to be here. For the second worker, the marginal production is 3. Remember, we went from 1 to 4, so 4 minus 1 is 3. So for the second worker, the marginal production is 3. So our marginal production curve looks like that. We see it rise at an increasing rate, fall, and will always go negative. Whenever you draw marginal production, it's important that you show it going into this negative band. Next, we'll do average product. Remember, it starts here, of course. For the next worker, we have 4 divided by 2 for 2. So the second worker, the average product is 2. The third worker, it's also 2. And then with the fourth worker, it falls to 1.5. And the fifth worker, it falls to 1. So average product looks like that. Whenever you draw this, there's 3 things that you should always pay attention to and be able to talk about and analyze. And really, it's just relationships of the 3 curves to each other, and these are purely mathematical relationships. When marginal product is at its highest point, this is going to be found at the same point where total product goes from increasing at an increasing rate to increasing at a decreasing rate. So this is the inflection point right there where that goes over, and that's always going to be at the same place where marginal product is at its maximum. The maximum point of average product here is always going to be cut or intersected by marginal product. Sometimes, again, here we have 2 that are the maximum point. That doesn't matter. This is still a true statement. So this is the second point that you should always make sure you draw correctly. That it's coming through, that marginal product is coming through the maximum point of average product. Finally, the third point is that when total product is maximized up here, and again, we have 2 that are the same total or the same highest point, but when total product is maximized, what that means is that we're not adding any additional product to it. So there is no marginal product, otherwise it would continue to go up. Therefore, marginal product is 0. So this point here correlates to that point there. Just like this correlated to that, and then these 2 are found together. This is a tough one, so you'll need to study how the curves are constructed, and we'll talk about more of some of the logic in class. Questions or comments, leave them below.